There are two books. You don't have to buy them, but I'm telling you, if you want to really get into this, these are two recent books I've done of the 15 or so I've published that are on the topic of this course. And they're both available for Springer or Amazon or whatever. The energy return on investment is $50, and the other one's 110 or 20 or something. So, and they both reflect my major contributions of a scientist called energy return on investment, which will tell you what it means, and biophysical economics, which is an approach to economics that's based on the natural sciences in addition to, or almost more than, the social sciences. And we'll talk about that in the sixth and seventh of our presentations. Here is what our objectives are in this course. One is cultural. It's like ornithology, to understand the earth around us. What is it? How does it work? And so forth. Second is understand the importance of energy, which is not taught in our classes and in our universities, not very much. And so that's the second. The third is honor those who've helped us to understand. Today we'll certainly do some of that. Four, show the role of energy and natural science in understanding contemporary events. Most of our politicians are oblivious to these kinds of things, which ultimately, well, as I used to say to my undergraduates, that Mother Nature holds the high cards. An attempt to dispel some myths and to prepare us for the future. And it's I've taught at universities for 50 years, and I don't know whether I made much impact or not of all those undergraduates, but the idea is to prepare for the future. And the future may be a future that comes even within the lifetimes of those of us relatively old folks. I'm 81 and will turn 82 during this course. So these things are not necessarily in the far distant future. So, in our undergraduate teaching, unfortunately, energy is usually explained to students only as one chapter of their physics course or as part of a physics lab. It's as if it exists only in the physics lab. In ecology, which I'm an ecologist, somebody asked me, but we'll get into that. It's considered only in one chapter on what is called trophic dynamics or food dynamics. In economics, if energy is discussed at all, it's only as a commodity. All of these are incorrect perceptions. Energy is much more important and much more pervasive than that, as I will try to show you how. It's very simple. In fact, energy is part of everything we do. Now, let's take the kitchen. We may think of energy when we boil water or turn on the oven, but who thinks of a sharp knife as energy, as a force concentrating device, of cooking as a means of giving the human gut access to plants whose cell walls made most plants inaccessible? That's the difference between plants and animals. Plants have rigid cell walls that are very hard for humans to digest unless you've cooked them first. So when cooking came along in evolutionary time, in other words, when fire came along and our use of fire for cooking, it enormously opened up a huge amount of food for humans. Okay, here's dishwashing. And who thinks of energy when you're scrubbing the dishes? But I do. Hot water cleans much better than cold water. It's because it has more energy. Soap helps you emulsify. It's a means of doing the energy of lifting particles off of your dishes. Scrubbing obviously is energy. And I'm a great fan of Gibbs Free Energy, which is leaving the dishes in the sink full of water. And you come back, and in due time, they're clean. My wife doesn't like that quite as much as I do, but the idea is the energy will do the dishwashing for you if you understand how to do it right. So here are the 8 lectures that I'm going to give. Today will tell you who I am, where I came from, why I'm interested in what I'm interested in. And then we're going to ask what energy is, our history of understanding energy, and the laws of thermodynamics. The second lecture will be the particular role of the sun, the Earth's early environment, evolution of life, green plants, and so forth, adaptations forced on life in an increasingly oxygenated environment, what an oxygenated environment has meant for energy, and then the formation of fossil fuels, the evolution of increasing biological complexity, and then ecological systems. The third lecture will be the evolution of mammals, proto-hominoids, that means early people before we were Homo sapiens, and our own species, the increased exploitation of energy by humans. Then the fourth lecture will be the Industrial Revolution leading to our modern situation. 5 will be energy return on investment. This is one of my things. And how much energy is left for humans? And are there limits to growth? Number 6 will be a standard view of economics, and the 7th will be my view, a biophysical perspective on economics. And finally, open. Oh, incidentally, the lectures will be about 1 hour, and then we'll have half an hour for discussion, including today, although we got started just a little bit late. Okay, who I am. Here's me. I was always interested in nature, in how does nature work? And I suppose initially that was how do you catch a fish out of nature. This was a photograph that was on the front page of my hometown newspaper. An old guy who wandered around with a camera took it, and I guess that captures my youth. And I grew up in the coast of Massachusetts, just south of Boston, called Hingham, Massachusetts. It was an idyllic childhood. I had loving, wonderful parents. My father was an engineer. My mother was a part-time school teacher. And I lived in a life, I lived a life of nature and of learning in a very, not in a wealthy way at all, quite the opposite, but I suppose I could go anywhere I wanted on my bicycle. And when I got to be about 12-year old, I got introduced to brook trout, and I just couldn't imagine what a beautiful, beautiful creature these were, and I became obsessed with trying to catch them. I also thought they were very good to eat, and I still do. I was outdoors all the time, an Eagle Scout, a geek, I suppose, and spent as much of my life outdoors as possible along the coast of Massachusetts and in fresh waters. I went to Colgate University as an undergraduate in upstate New York, which was a marvelous place for me. Obviously, a very beautiful place with good fishing and bird hunting, which I probably partook of maybe more than my studies. And then I was a literature major at Colgate until one winter afternoon, a guy came. Somebody said to me one day, "What are you doing tomorrow?" And I said, "I don't know. Go fishing or whatever." And he said, "Well, this guy is going to lecture um, on ecology." And I said, "This was 1963." And I said, "Ecology, what's that?" And he says, well, it's about swamps. You like it. And I went. And from that hour until this hour, I've been an ecologist and very happy to be that. Not an ecologist in terms of a tree hugger necessarily, although as a citizen, I'm certainly interested in protecting nature. Please turn off your microphones.
Good now. Thanks, Kim.
Okay, thank you.
Bye.
Incidentally, would somebody else record this? I'm nervous that, and let me know that you're recording it, because just to make sure we have a backup.
The recording light is on.
Good. And if somebody could volunteer to be a helper, that would be wonderful. But just do it by email, chall@esf.edu. Okay, here we are back in the day that I decided to become an ecologist. A fellow who had graduated from Colgate and gone on in ecology came back and gave a lecture, and he was a professor at that time at North Carolina State University. And he showed pictures of he and his graduates, or his, undergraduate students out in a salt marsh with scientific equipment and chemistry equipment and fish nets and all of that, studying how nature worked. And I thought, oh my God, you mean you can make a living doing something like this? And that was very exciting for me. So at about age 25, I decided there were three big things I could do with my life: become a good ecologist, do a lot of fly fishing, or have a family. And I wanted to do whatever I did well, and figured I couldn't do three of them, so I opted for one and two, and I chose not to breed, and I'm perfectly comfortable or happy with that now. And number one is what I wanted to do, and it was very, very hard, because I was a literature major, and I had to switch in midstream and take all this chemistry and physics and geology, and not to mention biology. So fundamentally, somebody asked me, am I a biologist? Yes, but I'm an ecologist, which is not just biology, but about how things fit together. And what happened to me that was most remarkable is I met this guy. I was an undistinguished master's student at Penn State. But then I met and studied under this fella, Howard, or H.T. Odum, who's Doctor of Systems Ecology and Energy. This was at the University of North Carolina, which I loved. A gorgeous, beautiful place, and had no trout, which was upsetting to me, but so be it. So I studied there for 3.5 years. And eventually got my PhD, and I worked really hard as a graduate student. Initially, I was having trouble coming up with a research topic. Then a famous salmon biologist from University of British Columbia came to University of North Carolina and gave a presentation on the population biology of Pacific salmon. And I was enthralled. And that evening at a party we had for Dr. Larkin and others, Odum took myself and Larkin into a corner and said, no one has studied fish migration from the systems perspective. And bang, I knew I had my topic. And so I went to a local stream in Duke Forest, which was not very far from Chapel Hill, from North Carolina. And in this beautiful little stream, I studied the movement of fish for 3 years. And I came up with this system of traps. And at that time, fish were not supposed to migrate. It was all about home range, and all the literature was on home range. And there was no sense of migrating fish. The only migrating fish were salmon and ocean fish coming into fresh water and so forth. But I found out that the fish migrated like crazy in this area. And so I studied this, and I weighed some 10,000 fish moving upstream and downstream and whatever else. And I also took many thousands of Winklers, which are chemical procedures for studying oxygen changes by which you can determine how much energy is produced by plants and how much is used by plants and animals and microbes in aquatic systems. So I I made a big study of this, and this is the migrations of study of fish over 3 years. And I found that big fish tended to move upstream and little fish tended to move downstream. And they migrated mostly in the spring with a secondary migration in the fall. And I wrote this up. This is saying pretty much the same thing. If anybody wants the details, I will send them this paper. And here's you look at the oxygen changes over a day. I hope you can see my cursor. And the oxygen goes up with the following the sun and down in the evening. And from this, you go through a series of really quite complex essentially calculus to determine how much photosynthesis and how much respiration there was in different parts of the stream. And thinking about this late at night and sitting on the rocks of the stream in between my oxygen samples, you see I take them every 3 hours over the around 24 hours. I came up with the concept of energy return on investment, and we'll talk about that later. I also studied photosynthesis, which is the lower line over 12 months of the year, and respiration, which is the amount of energy used by the ecosystem. And I found that in between, that was the energy supplied to the stream by leaves falling from the forest into the stream, which I had measured independently and came up with about the same amount of energy. So I studied the whole ecosystem and the role of the fish in it, came up with what we called energy flow diagrams. No need to go through the details here, but the idea is it was a damn good study. And it got me my first few jobs, and my initial respect, I suppose one could say, as an ecologist who could do good field work. And this field work actually is how I have continued to think my whole life. I see an economy, and I think of it in the same way as energy investments and energy used, and how much do you invest to get how much out of the system, and so forth and so on. So my whole way of looking at things, as I learned from Howard Odum, is a systems ecologist, not to look at one plant or one fish or one whatever by itself, but to look at how the whole system operated. And this was what my PhD was, and it set me up well for the rest of my life, I have to say, even though I went to some very, very different places, as we will see. Okay, during my dissertation work, I came up with the concept of energy return on investment, or EROI, in which it's energy delivered to society or an organism or whatever the entity is, compared to the energy put into that activity. Now, to give you a simple example, if you're looking at a cheetah chasing down an antelope, that cheetah has to gain more energy from his chase, her chase, to capture the prey, including the 9 times out of 10 she doesn't catch it, to not only be a positive return to pay for the energy she used in running, but also to pay for pregnancy, lactation, and bringing food to her kittens, et cetera, et cetera. Every component of society. The birds, I can look out my window right now and see on my bird feeder where they're getting an energy supplement with my bird seed. The trees, I can see just putting out their leaves. They are investing. The trees are investing in leaves right now in the expectation that they will get more energy back from those leaves than they are putting right now into putting them out, to building the leaves and defending them with chemicals and so forth. It's a very complicated thing when you jump into ecology, but I look into all organisms, all of life, all ecosystems as requiring positive energy return on investment, as does our society. I was very influenced by these people in my education, by Howard Odum, by M. King Hubbert, and by Jay Forrester. Odum was a systems ecologist. Hubbert was an oil analyst. And Jay Forrester came up with early computer models. I was learning how to make computer models of ecosystems. Here's Jay Forrester with very early what's called random access memory. It was the first computer memory, which was sets of intersecting wires with little iron donuts that would magnetize or not, by which you could store bits, zeros or ones. And that was our first way back in 1950s, of understanding how to make computers. But he then went on to do the first of the limits to growth models, and we'll talk about how that has influenced my life later. So from Odum, I learned of the incredible importance of fossil fuel energy to the human situation. Few environmentalists know how to deal with this issue well. And why do we focus in our schools and society so much on environment and so little on resources? Okay, just to give you an idea of what it means. This was in about 1910 or so. And this was a 33 horsepower harvester. And you can see 33 horses or mules, I suppose, there. And there's 5 people that are running this machine and capturing the grain. Now, 33 horsepower, you can count them, 11 times 3 or whatever it is. Here's a 200 horsepower harvester controlled by one worker, and somebody building the harvester and somebody running an oil well. But look at what a difference petroleum has made in our life. Just amazing. Now, from Forrester, I learned you could model the human situation, and we'll talk about that. As an ecologist, and Forrester's students, Meadows, Donella and Dennis and Jorgen Randers and William Behrens, wrote this book in 1970. This is by far the most important environmental book ever written, and it sold millions and millions of copies, I think more than Rachel Carson. And even Rachel Carson, my hat's off to her too. And it dealt with what were, as humans increased over time, here's the population, they would draw down resources and they would increase industrial output per capita to a point, but resources would decline and pollution would increase, and then the situation for humans became a little bit more iffy. And we'll talk about that later. One fateful day day I was browsing in the UNC store and found this paper. Now, remember, I was interested in ecology, but I found out I was really interested in resources as much as environment, in much as quality of environment, both of them, of course, but also resources, which very few ecologists today talk about. And this guy, M. King Hubbert, is a geophysicist at Shell Lab, and he wrote a book for the future of U.S. oil, and his predictions are in yellow. You see, he made them right here, and he predicted they would go down. And he said this is for the lower 48, because at that time he didn't know about Alaska. And this is what happened. The green, pretty close, a little bit higher than what Hubbert said. We had what's called peak oil, and it went down. Now things are different today with fracking, and we'll talk about that. We're getting a second peak from fracking, possibly peaking now. But anyway, I got really interested in this concept and started applying energy return on investment. I'll discuss that in just a minute. So I did a postdoc at Brookhaven and Oak Ridge National Laboratories, where I rubbed elbows with a lot of nuclear people. If you've seen the movie Oppenheimer, I knew some of the people that were in that movie and been to a lot of the places. I was also a professor at Cornell University for 13 years, University of Montana for 3 years, and then at the SUNY, meaning State University of New York College of Environmental Science and Forestry, mostly teaching various kinds of ecology. I kept working on this idea of energy return on investment in migrating fish, and would look at migrating sockeye salmon. You see, you get a bloom of phytoplankton and then of zooplankton that would move up the coast from April to late April to May to mid-May. This bloom would move up the coast, bloom of little plants and of little animals, and the little salmon would come out of the rivers just at the right time. Obviously, but they've been selected to this to nail their food, the zooplankton, which would be very abundant and then would practically disappear due to the dynamics of the aquatic systems, which I modeled to again and again and again, very complicated. And then the little salmon would move up and along the coast, following this bloom. And so I would do the energy return on investment for those migrating salmon. But a problem was that I became increasingly disaffected with many models in ecology, not with mine, but with ecology in general, most of which I thought were BS. So I spent 7 years studying economics, thinking, they got Nobel Prizes and they're smarter than us and so forth, would be better. I found the models used in economics even worse than the ones that were being used in ecology. So we'll talk about that in later lectures. So it seemed to me that economics as a discipline violated all the principles and laws of natural science that I had just spent a dozen years of hard work learning. So I started apply my natural science to economic issues. In our first paper, this was in Science in 1981. And if you don't know, this is the place, science and nature, these are the places to publish. Most people feel really lucky if they get one paper into Science or Nature. And well, of course, I'm pretty old now, but I just had another one in Nature last month. So that was my 12th in Science or Nature. So we use the yield per effort concepts from fisheries to look at petroleum drilling and how much energy it took to get the next unit of energy from drilling for petroleum, and found that it was dropping very rapidly. It was on the first page of the Wall Street Journal. That was my moment of fame, you know, and Andy Warhol said we all have our moment of fame, and I guess that was mine. And then a few years later, we wrote this foundational paper about energy in the US economy, a biophysical perspective, and it's basically just looking at the US economy as an ecosystem run by energy. And it's myself with two of my students, Cutler Cleveland and Robert Kaufman, and a colleague, Robert Costanza. And it was the cover issue of Science, the best thing you can do as a scientist. So I may be the only person ever to be denied tenure at an Ivy League university on the week I had the cover issue of Science. So I have a certain amount of something there. And so these are all, the cover doesn't quite show the original graph of all these dead cars. These are all dead cars with an oil well in the foreground. A great picture. Okay, now we're going to get into the science, and I need to make sure you understand a few words. Empirical means something you detect with your senses. Some would say data. Some would say it's what's real versus what's theoretical. You can take your pick on exactly what it means, but it means to me fundamentally real data gathered with our senses from the earth or wherever we're getting it. First principles, theoretical is, you know, our ideas about how things work. And science generally moves forward by going back and forth between the data and the theory that tries to explain the data. And I will try to explain data that I show you. First principles are things that we know are true and never violated. And they include laws of thermodynamics, first and second laws of thermodynamics, the law of the conservation of matter, and relatively few other things. Perhaps evolution fits in there. And finally, validation means if you make a model, either one in your mind or one in a computer, and then you go back and check it under non-trivial different circumstances against the empirical data, is your model validated? Does it stand up to what's going on in the real world? Okay, first question in this energy course. What is energy? Well, we don't know exactly. We sort of know. We know its effects. Energy is usually defined as the ability to do work, which is the ability to exert a force causing displacement of an object. So if anything moves, energy has been involved in moving it, because things don't move on by themselves, or they don't change their relative movement. If they're moving through space, then they keep moving. That's Newton's first law. But if it changes its situation, energy must be involved. Despite this rather confusing definition, and I admit it's confusing, its meaning is very simple. It's just the force that causes things to move. And energy is divided into two types, potential and kinetic. Potential is it has the ability to move something, and kinetic means something is moving. Now, most of the energy that we deal with is from the sun, And so we have to think about energy as photons, being the waves are particles. They have characteristics of both, of things that come from the sun. If you don't know what that is, go out on a bright day and hold your hand up and you can feel it. Well, we can feel it, we can measure it, we know it moves things, but we don't know exactly what it is. We know its forms: radiation, pressure, sound, heat, movement. We know the sun provides us with a lot of it. uh, from a biologist's perspective, the universe, we'll talk about this in the next lecture, the universe is quote unquote running down. The free energy left over from the Big Bang is running down in time, and life has intercepted with this little paddle wheel, intercepts some of that energy and runs the machinery of life. And here we are. It's astonishing. And what you're left with is low temperature gradient energy unavailable for work. The universe being a little bit warmer after this happens. So some people talk about the heat death of the universe. I don't worry about it. Now, think about our ancestors. Here is a rendition of our possible ancestors. What do they know about energy? Here we are, we've got all this university education and all these special telescopes and tools and so forth. What did they know about energy? Well, they probably knew quite a bit. They knew where the animals would be. They knew how to get them. They knew how to invest energy in getting their food. They knew how to cook their food so that they could get more nutrition, especially from plants. They knew how to train train a dog to help them get more food. I don't know if they had a name for energy exactly, but hang on. Now, as time went on, people became more civilized. I'm not sure we're more civilized given what we do with other people in wars and prejudice and other things, but supposedly we're more civilized, and this is Plato and Aristotle in ancient Greece, thinking, incidentally, starting to think and write down what they thought about plants. And a guy named Theophrastus was really pretty good at understanding plants. So we started to think about this systematically and writing it down. And when you wrote it down, somebody else could understand it and argue with you if they wanted. Now, at that time and before, energy was very much in people's minds because they named most of their gods, or many of their gods, after what's essentially energy. Ra for the Egyptians was the sun god. And, that if you want to know for sure what to worship, you might start with the sun because your life depends upon it. Zeus was the guy who was in charge of the lightning. That's energy. Vulcan was in charge of fire, which of course is energy. And Prometheus, he's the guy who brought the fire to the humans. So many of the ancient gods, and more than these, were about energy. But there began to be a few men and women, some important women who often are discounted by the men, but they made important contributions to science. We've talked about Theophrastus. In the first major question that was dealt with scientifically, which I find fascinating, how did humans learn to think about these things, was how did the planets move? And did the sun go around the earth, as was obvious, or something else? And they asked me this in my freshman science methods course, how can we tell? And it turns out it was not easy to tell whether the earth moved around the sun or the sun around the earth. And a guy who thought about it a lot was named Ptolemy. He was a Sicilian lived in Egypt, and he was a brilliant mathematician. And what we have here is called something that bothered a lot of people, the retrograde motion of Venus. If you keep track of where Venus is over the course of years, you'll find that it tends to move in the same directions that other planets do, the outer planets, but for a little while it goes backwards. And this was really, really scrambled the minds of Ptolemy and other people back then. And he came up with the idea that all of these planets and the sun and all, according to Ptolemy, rotated around the Earth, X being the Earth, and he came up with the idea of epicycles, cycles within cycles, to explain this backward motion. And he was such a good mathematician that he was able to predict the position of the planets for many, many, many centuries from his mathematical tables. He was really a brilliant guy. But then along came, I'm going to recommend various just good reads as I go through here, and this is a wonderful read about how this Dane, Tycho Brahe, and this Pole, Nicholas Copernicus, figured it out. And Brahe made, because the instruments weren't very refined, they had to make them big. That's why the pyramids in Mexico were big, and because they didn't have brass at that time, and they were observatories to look at the sun. And when did the sun start coming back, and when should you plant your crops and so forth? These were very important questions, and they put a lot of effort into measuring them. And Brahe was a wealthy guy, and he made a whole big observatory. It's just a marvelous read. And just in the last months of his life, he allowed Nicholas Copernicus to look at his data, and Copernicus figured out for sure that the Earth went around the sun. So it's a great read. And it's only in the appendix of this book that I had the question that was asked to me as a freshman in college, as how to resolve whether the sun went around the Earth or the Earth goes around the sun. It's in the appendix of that book. Okay, and then Galileo would talk about these two systems and whether Ptolemaic with the sun going around the Earth or Copernican with the Earth going around the sun. That was a huge, huge question that got early science rolling. Kepler came along and he came up with his 3 laws of motions. And Galileo got in trouble, who invented a telescope and could see all this stuff. And he understood that planets travel in ellipses, but because the universe was made by God, this was the Catholic view at the time, and planets travel, and God was perfect, and circles were perfect, and ellipses were not. Galileo finally had to go to recount. He had to say that the Earth went around, that the sun went around the Earth in the last months of his life, or the Pope would throw him in jail, which he was too old to go to jail. Oh, it's a horrible story. So anyway, but people looked at the data, and the data did not support the concept or the theory that the Earth went around, that the sun went around the Earth. Newton came along and showed you could write simple mathematical relations that could explain all kinds of things, the laws of motion, the law of universal gravitation, which incidentally is correct in terms of its predictive ability, but probably not correct in terms of why. That had to wait for Einstein. But anyway, Newton was certainly an incredibly brilliant guy. So science was progressing, but our knowledge of energy in 1800 was very confused. Heat was thought to be a substance called phlogiston that flowed from hot objects to cold objects. And meanwhile, practical people, starting with Newcomen, invented steam engines. And then Watt invented a much better one. But this whole idea you had to heat steam and push a piston up and then put in cold water and condense the steam, and the atmosphere would push the piston back. These were great big things, and you could pump water out of the mines that way. And this was about 1720. And then Watt came along and invented his steam engine that would push steam on both sides of the cylinder and then exhale the gas to the atmosphere. That became an amazing thing. And so there was tremendous progress being made, but people didn't understand what heat was or energy or coal or the relation between coal and heat, except they know perfectly well if you burned coal, you could get heat and make steam. So along came first guy to figure out energy was Benjamin Thompson. And what he found out was this was how you'd make a cannon. You'd have a couple of horses working around and make some mechanical ability, and you'd bore out a cannon. And by boring out a cannon, well, that was a big industry in the time. And he would blunt the drill bit and bore into this forever, and the cannon would keep heating up. And I'm not quite sure how this picture explains it, but the point is he could boil water for a week and he never ran out of heat. So he knew it couldn't be phlogiston. It was the first understanding that heat was something else besides some kind of fluid substance. But still, scientists are confused about heat. And they continue to be confused about this. And what was important was that people gradually began to understand that what's important is not heat itself, but a gradient. And the guy who figured that out is this guy, Sadi Carnot. It was not heat that was needed, but a gradient heat. He was a French military engineer, and he published this in 30 copies, 30 individual copies, and then he died. And then, fortunately, somebody found his book in a Paris left bank bookstall, and thermodynamics was, or at least the beginning of it, was born. And this guy, Joule, came along, and we name our energy units now in Joule, or sometimes we use calories as 4 joules to a calorie, but he was a brewer, and most of the scientists at that time were upper class, and so they kind of poo-pooed Joule for a while, but Joule made this very simple machine. He would take a weight, a kilogram, and he'd drop it a meter, and he'd turn this paddle in a bottle of water and look at what the temperature did. That's a thermometer. And he would find what was the thermal equivalent of mechanical work, or the thermal equivalent of mechanical work. And he found out that you could take any other kind of work, but mostly mechanical, and turn it ultimately into heat. And that was the third, I suppose. One was the Rumford drilling canyons. Phlogiston doesn't run out. Number 2 is Carnot. You need a gradient to make things work. And number three is that all energy use ultimately ends up as heat. It was Thomson or Lord Kelvin. We use Kelvin units for temperature too. He heard about Thomson. I'm sorry, he heard about joules, and then he went back and tested it himself, and he found out, yes, Joule is right. He's just a brewer, but he's a brilliant brewer. And then he starts putting it all together and comes up with a book on the dynamical theory of heat. And Thomson eventually came up with the second law of thermodynamics, which is a major step. And then finally, Thomson and Clausius and Helmholtz put them together as the laws of thermodynamics, and here they are. This is the most important thing about energy. The first law of thermodynamics is the quantity of energy is conserved. It never changes, at least unless you import it or export it. So in a system, the quantity is conserved, but the important law is the second law. Well, they're both important. It's the quality of energy is not conserved, because at each transformation, some of the energy is lost to low-grade heat. Now, around that time became the development of the idea of entropy, which meant disorder or the lack of order. And you might hear a lot of talk about entropy. I think entropy should never have been invented. I think it just leads to a lot of confusion. Because with the
Yeah, I need to schedule a phone appointment with Dr. Yang. Let me give you my number. It's 101-363-22.
Good. Is somebody talking to me?
No, I was talking on the phone.
Oh,
Anthony.
okay. Okay, so for the first time, we understood energy in the day-to-day world around us. And then later people, especially Faraday, Maxwell, helped us understand the relation of electrical energy and magnetism. And then Einstein came along, but that is not required for this course. And I'm still working on it, understanding it. But so where we're going with all this is what we call my final, I'm almost done here, my final professional goal. I got interested in all of this because I thought that economics, as was taught in our universities, and as I learned and as governs our lives, is a fairy tale. And I want to replace it with a proper understanding of how systems work, how energy works, how natural selection works, and the realities of the finite nature of our Earth. And that's where our course will be going. And that's the end of lecture number 1. Almost on time. And I am now going to see if I can get out of the system we're in, and hopefully you're going to ask me some questions. Let's see. Here we are.
What do you want?
Now, if you want to say anything, now, if you guys aren't going to talk with me, this isn't going to work. So you better have some questions. I'd like everybody who'd like to, please, to turn on their camera. I like to look at your, yeah, hi, John will be with you in just a minute. And there's a way to react. You can hold up your hand in react, and then I will call on you one at a time. And Here we have it. Just a minute. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 2.
There you
Let's
are.
see, David, you're second. A nice last name. Okay, so John Klotzel?
Pretzel,
Yes.
like pretzel. Charlie, you said the current view, our current view of energy in writ large is incorrect, and you're going to replace it with something on your last slide, and I missed. You're telling us something about the finite limits. You're going to replace it with another concept that you want us to go home with.
After 8 lectures now, we haven't got there yet. And fundamentally, remember I showed you that picture, that book, the textbook called Energy and the Wealth of Nations. And it takes a whole bloody book to explain it. And so I will try to do that in a couple of lectures. But what I wish to replace the contemporary economics, which is called neoclassical economics. Classical economics is Adam Smith and Ricardo and Karl Marx and so forth. And neoclassical is starts with Menger and Walras and some others, and is what's taught in college today. And I'll explain all this, which is unmoored, I think is a good word, unmoored from its relation to the natural world, from the laws of science that we understand in ecology and we understand in chemistry and so forth. So
I just finished watching a Zoom lecture from an Ollie course, which just started.
Somebody's muttering away here, something about a Zoom lecture. So let's try to. Okay, so I guess I will. The second person was David Hall. Then on deck is Mark
think it'd be
Gibson and then
interesting.
Carol Lunt. And it's lovely to see the hands.
Supposedly it recorded, and if I get a link, I will send it to you. You have an Ollie catalog.
Sadi Carnett and the gradient of heat, energy theory. I didn't do
I'm sorry, my audio is not very good here. Wait a minute.
Oh, he's not coming through real clearly.
How's my voice?
Fine.
Yours is
Perfect.
fine.
Okay, David, ask me your question again slowly.
on Sadi Carnett's gradient of heat energy theory.
Oh, God.
Heat.
Need somebody.
What I understand is garbled. Did anybody get
I
that?
just felt really shitty.
Oh, he has a problem with his microphone.
Language.
Apparently you have a problem with your microphone.
He was asking about the French Carnot.
No, I think
Question
yeah.
about
Carnot.
the energy of heat.
A question about Carnot.
Shitty
On the
Ferguson.
energy of heat, which you said was gradient. He discovered gradient of heat.
Well, let's put it. So if I have a weight, this coffee cup here is a weight, even though it's got a beautiful painting by Monet on it. For the moment, it's just a weight. This has no energy. But if I talk about it in relation to my lap or the floor, in other words, a gradient of gravitational position, then it has energy. If you can't drop it, it doesn't even have kinetic energy. But if you have the possibility of dropping it, then it has energy. So heat, if I live in a world that's 80 degrees and I have a pot of 80-degree water, I cannot do any work with it because I have no gradient. I cannot invent a machine that will take heat from the 80-degree pot and put it out into the 80-degree environment. So I can't do any work with it. But if I have a pot of 80-degree water and it's freezing outside, I can do work with that same 80-degree pot of water. This means that if you have a coal or gas-fired power plant that's using water in a river to cool the power plant, because you have to cool the steam behind the turbine, or you can't, the turbine won't turn. A power plant will work more efficiently in winter when you have a bigger gradient than in summer. And so that's a problem, for example, in France, where Carnot is from. In France, where they have 30 nuclear power plants, most of their electricity is from nuclear, but the rivers are heating up with climate warming. And so it's getting harder and harder to make all of their electricity from the nuclear power plants because the rivers are too warm. They can't get rid of the heat. David, did that answer your question well enough?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, good. Okay, Mark, you're next.
Oh, yeah, okay. I love the term entropy, and I use it quite a bit, but my simple definition for it is simply the tendency of energy in high concentration areas to move into areas of lower concentration. It's the gradient or the temperature energy differential you're talking about, the movement of heat from a warm area to a cold area. But what ends up happening is that when you, in an example like your cup, there actually is energy there. It's just bound in molecules. But if we disperse that energy by adding heat to it, those molecules will break apart into all of their atoms and eventually get diffused evenly throughout the universe in principle. So to me, entropy is the degradation of higher energy into a more stable, lower energy form. And I like to use that term all the time when I see like cars rusting out, a fender going out. I say, hey, there's entropy at work. Area of high energy being converted into a form of lower, more stable energy. And it's a diffusion process from high concentration to low concentration. And that differential that drives all our engines and steam.
I have to mostly, I suppose, agree with you, but I have to give you a little bit more here. I mean, I certainly understand entropy when I look into my step-grandson's room. That concept of entropy, I understand very much. The reason I'm having a problem right now with it, with the term entropy, is that I'm engaged in a big argument with other, let's call them energy analysts, but not scientists. And I don't want to pull rank here, but it's a good argument. And you can find in the scientific literature a lot of references to that there's selection for maximizing entropy. And that bothers me because I don't think there's selection for more entropy. The selection only can operate for order because it's the order that generates the circumstances that are not entropy. Entropy is sort of the background condition. I agree with you, things tend towards entropy. But the thing that's interesting is, and the thing that's selected for, I mean, certainly there's no Darwinian selection for maximizing entropy, but entropy is created as life captures sunlight, turns it into sugars, and then the whole processes of life generating heat at each step. So some people have argued that there's natural selection for the generation of that heat. And with the rare exceptions, such as a warm-blooded animal like us, where sometimes, rarely, I mean, mostly heat is to be gotten rid of, but heat probably has been selected for in a whale, for example, who has to keep warm in the cold ocean. But the important thing is the generation of order, not the generation of disorder. If you want to discuss that further, we can, but I'm just telling you where I'm coming from.
Yeah.
And if you want to get into it much, much deeper, I could perhaps engage you in some of the discussions we're having, but I'm not sure the other people would appreciate that.
Yeah.
I can certainly show you my perspective on this, but I'd have to hide some other names. Somebody's very sensitive about this. Carol.
I'm not sure if it's a question or just if you could speak to it. I read a while back that like the Black Sea, like there's so much organic matter that's flowing in that it's kind of a dead zone because it has to break down. It uses the oxygen to break down all this organic matter, so there aren't any fish. So I was just thinking about that when you started out the lecture about, your work in streams and trout and how, there's a whole system of organic matter that the fish are getting. And the system of the Black Sea seems to me is so curious, because there's a need to take all this organic matter and break it down, uses all the oxygen. And so there's nothing, it just kind of, I don't know. It's not a question, but just a comment.
Well, I think it's a good one that we'll get to, because you don't have to go to the Black Sea to find this. It happens off the mouth of the Mississippi River. And what's happening is we're generating so much organic material, a lot of it sewage, and we put it into the Mississippi River, and it sinks to the bottom, and it uses up the oxygen as it decomposes. And there's a dead zone off the mouth of the Mississippi River, and that's where they first found it. And now they found it off many, many rivers in Asia, where there's just an awful lot of organic matter that's going in. And if you think about it, one of the great oil and gas production areas of the United States is in Louisiana, southern Louisiana, associated with the Mississippi River. And so there's been organic matter that's been going in there. The oil is ancient plants, and that got covered up with sediments. We'll cover that in a later lecture. And as you produce this stuff, so organic matter has been coming down the Mississippi River for a lot of times. It's just that the rate has increased with human activity in the Black Sea, off the mouth of the Mississippi River, off the mouth of the Yangtze River, and all around the world, killing fish. And it was maybe first studied in the Baltic. And I knew Anne-Marie Janssen was a close friend of mine, was studied that in the past. So you want more information on that, I can supply it. From one of my past books, she had a chapter in one of my past books that was really good on exactly that. And okay. We'll talk about the world originally had no oxygen. Oxygen is a strange element to find. Free oxygen, meaning oxygen not combined with something else, because oxygen is such an active molecule, it grabs up with carbon or some other molecule very quickly. And the existence of, I think it's next lecture, we talk about how important the existence of free oxygen has been. I mean, we require oxygen, but how many 400 million years ago it was a toxic substance.
Okay, thank you.
If you read if you read Kurt Vonnegut in God Bless You, Mr. Goldwater, Mr. Goldwater was a fireman and he spent his whole life trying to keep the things he loved from combining with oxygen. And if you look at Los Angeles a little while ago, that's what happened. The things we loved were combined with oxygen. So oxygen is a very active element. And we have to worry about that here in Ashland too. Okay, Stella.
I'll try to be clear. So if you're dealing with a system, the systems can be on different levels. You can have an open system or closed system.
Oh, yeah.
And clearly the entire universe could be a system, but we won't deal on that level, right? On which level will you deal? And
I'm going to start with the universe next Monday. So mostly I'm going to deal with our world, our ecosystems, the United States, things you're familiar with more or less. But I'll go anywhere you want.
Because you could have, in the lab, the experiment, you could isolate that and have that as a system too.
I can give you examples. Look up Bernard cell. Bernard cell.
Yeah.
And that's a system that's noted for doing something called maximum power that I'll talk about a little bit.
And I have
in hurricanes build structure that pulls more energy out of the ocean. They are like life. They're reinforcing systems that take energy to build structure to pull more energy or more power out of their environment, just as life is. I find that fascinating.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, in each circumstance, where would you close the system? It's very difficult.
Oh, I learned early on is that you define the boundaries yourself. The investigator defines the boundaries. That's the first rule. The first rule of drawing a systems energy diagram.
And another, fundamental, but how low on the level of energy will you go to? Subatomic level? Will you go some unification?
I don't think I'm particularly qualified to do that. I'm actually reading right now 3 books on Einstein to try to understand it better, and I can tell you I don't understand it well enough to tell you to act as an authority on it.
But there is some kind of a basic unit, right, of energy, the lowest denominator.
I was pretty happy at the level of science that I learned in the 1960s and 70s, which might be a cop-out.
Which would be?
A cop-out.
No. I mean, what would that be? Is it?
Molecules and my focus was on ecosystems, which are pretty big.
Right.
And fish and things that I could see.
Yeah, but then there is a light involved. Almost
you could ask questions anytime and push me, and if I don't know, I'll say I don't know.
I don't want to take all the time. I don't want to be a pig. But you will involve with you will talk about light, right, as a source of energy.
Oh, absolutely.
And light is a very fundamental unit of
absolutely.
Energy. Yeah. So will that be
not light, but photons?
Right.
Can you tell me what a photon is?
Well, it's a unit of energy, let's say that way.
It's got properties of particles and properties of waves.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a warticle or something, or a pave.
Pave.
You keep at it. I love the questions. I don't care how difficult or crazy they are. Not that that was crazy, but it's I don't care how difficult they are. John,
I'm just wondering, this is not the question I was queued up for, but do you consider the universe a closed system?
no, no, all kinds of light is going away at the speed of light.
Well, does it have boundaries? I mean, in a world of in a concept of multiverses.
Well, I got to tell you a question I tried to answer myself and have been unable to. Is according to Einstein. I mean, every time, like I said, we look for a place in the sky with no visible stars from the largest telescope on Earth, and you point the Hubble at it, and it's got billions of galaxies. So the universe is vastly larger than we had any idea. Now, according to Einstein, the universe is curved.
Okay.
And so Einstein implies a limit to the universe. And I've been looking for why he thinks that, because space-time is curved by gravity. So the whole gravity of the universe, does that hold it in place? Well,
the concept of a boundary doesn't work too well in those kind of.
I mean, I'm an ecologist, not an astronomer, so I'm not an astrophysicist. So, there are very distinct limits to where I can go with any confidence.
Well, the question I was going to queue up related to Mark's notion about entropy. I teach cell biology in my courses, and that was my career in cell biology. And the cell is a perfect example of a highly ordered structure that's surrounded by disorder. And without a cell membrane, things move away, flow away. You've got to contain things, which takes energy to build the membranes, to build all the organelles that comprise a working cell. And so, I think it's a nice example of an ordered system in a disordered world. And so if you break the membrane, things are going to go back towards lower free energy, and you're going to break down molecules, and the cell can't exist in that, and life can't exist without that degree of order.
And so what's the point? Where should we focus? Should we focus on the disorder or on the order? To me, the amazing thing is the order.
No, it's got to be the order. I mean, if you can make photosynthesis more efficient and lose less heat, it seems like there'd be strong selection for that, not for creating more lost heat in the process. So I think we're at 37%.
Well, it's trickier than that, John.
Pardon?
It's trickier than that, and let me give you an example, because this is an area I've written a bunch of papers. So, as a scientist, I've written 350 almost papers of various sorts, and a number of them, most of them have been on energy one way or the other. And this one, I'm really interested in the relation between energy capture and energy use. And if you want to send me an email asking for it, just say, send me your gradients paper and send me a couple papers. I'll send them to you. The gradients one and the maximum power one. And this applies to anybody. And I'd love to have somebody volunteer to help me set up a discussion room or whatever. But I'm not going to do it myself. So anyway, but anybody can email me and I will send you papers or whatever if I have them. So the point is, if you know a forest, John, you walk into a forest and you walk down a piney forest, say, and or you do it in a deciduous forest. Do you know what leaf area index is?
I can kind of imagine, but I'm not sure.
It's square meters of leaves per square meter of ground. So this is easier in a deciduous forest where there's enough water. You will find a leaf area index generally of 6 about. Now, it's interesting. If you can pile up. You can do this in the laboratory, or you can occasionally do it out in a forest by experimentally, but it's a lot tougher. You can build a forest with a leaf area index of 12, and the last leaf going down, the 12th leaf going down, will still get some sunlight, because some sunlight will go through the leaves and go through the vibrations of the leaves and so forth. The 12th leaf will get some sunlight, but there's an energy cost to support a leaf. And there's energy cost to support the branch. And so trees have been selected, and all around the world where there's enough water, you find a leaf area index of about 6. Now, if you have a leaf area index of 1, just one layer of leaves, that leaf will get a lot of energy. And it will pay way more profit than the cost of the leaf. You can do it with 2 leaves and it's still making a profit, even 3 up to 6. But then it starts costing too much energy to maintain the leaf relative to the energy it captures from the sun. And that's why you don't get a leaf area index of 12. Even though you get more energy, you don't get more net energy.
That makes sense.
And that's part of an energy return on investment argument to the tree. So I think at your cell biology, you could probably think for a while and come up with an example or two. No.
Yeah, well, I just threw out the idea of the mitochondria being
all of nature is bounded by, is constrained by, must operate between energy costs and energy gains of doing things. And what is particularly interesting to me is how that changes over environmental gradients. As you go up a mountain in elevation, as it gets wetter or drier in different environments. How does that relate to? A lot of people only look at it in terms of energy gain, but I like to look at it in terms of energy gains and energy losses and their differences. And if any of you are trout fishermen, I'm a very fanatical trout fisherman, I can give you a wonderful example about how that works with trout in a stream. It works everywhere. All of life, all of natural selection is about energy costs and energy gains and trying to optimize the circumstances, such as with leaf area index. But it doesn't work where water is limiting, and so you don't have a leaf area index of 6 in a dry place. And with another thing is, if you walk down a path in the woods around here, then wait a minute, it's my wife. I got to take it. Hi, I'm in my class.
Yeah, she wants you to stop.
Hello? Press select. What the hell is select? God damn, excuse me. I don't know how to use this phone.
I'm an expert.
So my wife wants me. I don't know what to do. So anyway, if you walk in a path in the woods, if you go up Tolman Creek, way up to the top, there's a beautiful path up there, and you can see it beautifully up there. You can see it anywhere. Where you have evergreen trees, and there's a road through the woods. You see the lower boughs go out into the road. But on the other side, where there's a lot more trees and a lot less light, you can go and you can find the nubs of what the branches were originally. But I don't know whether they cut themselves off or the tree cuts them off. But if you can't carry your energy cost, you're done. And you can see that because the green boughs on a path in the woods of an evergreen situation will will be much lower in the road where they don't have so much competition. How do I answer it? Hello? What?
What is this?
March of progress.
Yeah, something to eat after the hiking.
Yeah,
And back in the car.
and it won't start.
You know, for a while, the whole bit of place is rusted and you get it out.
His wife's car doesn't start.
Okay, I'm sorry, but I'm still in my class. What do you want me to do? Yeah, well, we're running over. What do you want me to do? Okay. My wife is running a class on hiking with dogs. And on her way back, she stopped for coffee and the car won't start. So there's a practical energy problem, but it doesn't particularly. Well, we're at the end of the time, but I'm having a good time. I'll talk for a few minutes if anybody needs anything.
I had a little question that I might insert in here. We were
Yeah.
talking about space and talking about the conservation of energy, and earlier stated it needs to be a positive exchange, and then you've highlighted that with even the boughs of the tree and the sunlight through the leaf index. So there's, this press to go to Mars and the moon too. I'm not even really sure about the moon, why we're going to the moon, but why would we even consider going to Mars as if we're going to mine something or bring something back from there? How could that ever have a positive energy exchange to venture off our planet?
Well, we've wasted enormous amounts of energy in the past because of the egos of independent men. And probably women too, I don't know. And Hitler comes to mind, and Elon Musk comes to mind. I suppose I'm not supposed to say political things, and I don't wish to, but
This is economics.
Yeah, it's economics. It's absurd. It takes. Oh, I used to have the numbers, but it takes an enormous amount of. I think it takes so many $1 million to get 1 kilogram into orbit, or whatever that is. And no, it's absurd. It's just people lying to you. You're being lied to a lot, and I don't mean just by the Republicans, but by all kinds of people. And that's part of what we would like to give you better tools for understanding how to undermine when people are obviously lying to you. And that's a perfectly good example. There's no reason in hell to go to Mars, because Mars can't possibly exist without being sustained from Earth. And if his or somebody's idea of building a colony in Mars is so that we have a refuge of humanity, if we destroy the Earth, then I don't think we're worth saving. So I don't know. We'll get into this a little bit, how even increases of efficiency can work against what it is that we are really trying to do. So one of the first things that one must do in any science and any project of which I've been familiar with was is to state your objectives. And an objective of going to Mars, when we have so much to take care of and so many people to take care of, we have people to take care of in Ashland, for crying out loud. And so, country as energy rich as we are, if we can't supply basic housing for people, to me, it's a horrible thing. All right, but that's not. I don't want that to be. I'm speaking as not your instructor here, but as a citizen. I don't want this to be a political place at all.
Yeah.
But that's a good question, Diana. And I think you can do some pretty simple energy assessments and try to figure it out. Any other questions?
I'm going to sign off, but thank you very much.
Yeah, this is the any suggestions as how to make this better? Or is there anybody who'd like to join me as an assistant? That would be, send me an email, chall@esf.edu.
You need someone technical, somebody
Well,
with the technology, I think. When you talk about
Better,
chat
but
rooms.
if you don't have the technology, I might find some work for you anyway, if you want. Okay, good to meet y'all. I hope this meets your expectations, and send me an email if it doesn't, or maybe even if it does. I don't know. Whatever.
ehall@esf.edu.
ESF, Environmental Science and Forestry.edu.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome, Linda.
Let's see.
Questions of these things are always problematic.
Well,
But on the
yes.
other hand, you learn some things from the questions too.
And on the other hand, he's didn't cover it, and it's important, and so it
Some of
has a
them.
role.
Now you better be careful because I'm listening into you, Barbara.
Aha.
You have a question?
We enjoyed
I'll
it.
answer it.
That was very good. Very exciting. And I took a lot of
Big
notes.
Brother's watching you.
That's so fun.
We enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
dear.
Okay, what's your name?
I'm Jim.
Theo?
Jim.
Tim?
Jim.
Jim. Okay.
Okay. We'll be back.